fully support Sweden's membership in NATO.
The president gears up pressure to secure Sweden's NATO membership as Western leaders get ready to meet. The summit coming at a point of rising tensions in the region as the White House reportedly plans to move forward with giving Ukraine controversial weapons. We'll sit down with two key members of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Republican John Barrasso and Democrat Tim Kaine. Then
All right, welcome to Overtime. We're in the business of being in business, and this is where the best business takes place because for some reason we get into the nitty-gritty here. And we were just talking about the whole issue of sports, universities, identity, race. Marcus, what was the point you wanted to make?
The point I was making was that there's a direct correlation between the athletic program, the strength of the athletic program, and the strength of the academic program. It's hard to point at a school that has a well-known brand athletically that is not doing very well academically. They go hand in hand. Now, why is that important? Because it means that the African-American athlete is adding significant value to predominantly white institutions. If you look at the March Madness, right? Here's the real madness of March. In March, the NCAA tournament is a $1 billion tournament. $1 billion tournament. Plus, in that tournament, you have 70+% African-American players on those courts. Of that $1 billion, HBCUs, black schools, only get about $3 or $4 million. That's it. So this is where we have to pay attention as a community to where we have the opportunity to do better. If the Supreme Court says, hey, they don't want you there, then you ought to take that note and say, well, then if you don't want me there, then my kids shouldn't play there.
I have to disagree.
Well, well, go ahead then. That's what this is about.
With Marcus. I like Marcus a lot. But he said, what is in the school that, let's start up the pipeline. They call it higher ed, I call it lower ed for some reason. But anyway, let's look at the pipeline. He said if you have a strong athletic program, you have a strong academic program. That's not always the case. Jack Yates wants 3 state championship basketball.
I was speaking on a collegiate level.
Oh, I'm talking. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'll get there to collegiate in a minute. Jack Yates wants 3 or 4 state championship basketball and consistently had an F rating. That's an example of the overemphasis on sports and less on academics. There's a book called The Smartest Kids in the World, and it's by Amy somebody. I always forget the author's name, but they said that the countries that succeed academically mostly have underemphasized extracurricular and sports and focus on academics. And look at the top 10 countries, he's talking about Canada, Poland, not all Asian countries have strong academics outperforming America because they have less emphasis on extracurricular and focusing more on academics. So if we focus on academics, and you talk about top tier universities, let's look at Rice University. Have the Owls won any championship?
No. and Sergio, I think you misunderstood my point.
Oh, yes, sir.
I said you cannot point to a stellar athletic program that has a failing academic program, right? Michigan has a good academic program, right? Alabama, if you have a degree from Alabama, you consider to have been at a good academic program. I'm not saying that we should value sports over X, Y, and Z. What I am saying is that the evidence shows that if there is a stellar athletic program there is not a lagging academic program. I can't find a
But there's
case.
not a single research that shows that.
And I love Rice University, by the way. Come on now.
I'm going to interject.
They have affirmative action
let me interject
there, but
here.
anyway. But one quick point. There's not a single study that shows that the sports contribute to academic outcome performance. There's not a single study. Engagement, yes. Motivating students to come, but that's not the purpose of school. You go to the dance, you go to swimming pool to swim, you go to school to learn academics, not to play sports. That is an enticement to motivate a student to come, but that should not be the purpose.
But it also attracts talent. It also attracts dollars, right?
Yeah.
So it attracts talent instructionally, and it attracts talent academically, meaning when you see these big programs on television, you want to teach there. When you see these big programs on television, you want to go there. It is an attraction. It's a magnet. And so as a result, they get better and they get more.
But the whole purpose of education
I talked to the chief chief of UH Communications. He said, this designation makes, for whatever person, makes a degree from the University of Houston more valuable.
More valuable. Wow.
Okay, okay, go ahead, Holly.
It's an unfortunate dynamic, but it is reality. The athletics that draws attention, it draws money, and so forth. But I'm with you. I mean, there's been a kind of watering down of academics, and we look at jumping back to K-12 education, right? There's so much emphasis on the school's got to have the state-of-the-art football stadium and then auditorium. We have a school district in the state of Texas has a water park and a golf course and all kinds of things. But what's happening in the academics, right? Are we really giving students value with some of these degrees? And I like some of the analysis that's coming out now that's saying, okay, if you go to this university, what is the graduation rate? What is the higher rate after graduation? What do those postgraduate test scores look like? We used to take the GRE. I think that's been thrown by the wayside. But you look at that and have an analysis. We had the clip of the person earlier talking about $250,000 in debt. What did they get for that? When we were looking at colleges for our kids, we looked at graduation rates. We looked at postgraduate employment rates. I mean, it's sad that we're talking about, yay, sports. Okay, I love sports. I'm not knocking sports, but the purpose of the university, the purpose of our public schools is to educate.
Okay, I want to jump in here with a little Bill King trivia. I mean, Bill played basketball for a highly regarded program at Clear Lake, and probably could have played maybe Division III basketball.
Wow.
But instead he probably went to the University of Houston and started doing what I did, which was studying some.
So
enjoying female camaraderie. I don't know. King, what's your take on this?
Mr. D3.
Mr.
D3.
I was actually a walk-on at Houston Baptist University.
Oh, you were? Okay. See?
And I played with their squad for about a month. And at Clear Creek, I was a center. They put me out at guard at Houston Baptist to give you some idea of going from a high school to a college level. And I had white man's disease. I can't jump, so there was that problem too. But I think again the panel's done a great job of fleshing this out. Sergio's described the way you'd probably like the world to be. Marcus described the way the world is. There are a lot of things that I learned from sports that were valuable lessons, I think, and help you, especially. And one reason I'm glad to see girls playing so many more sports today is because a lot of the dynamics and being in business and running companies and being part of a management team and everything, I learned a lot of those skills in sports.
Yeah. There's actually research that shows when you're hiring, who should you look for? One is military, one is athletes, people who have worked on a team in a team environment before.
But getting back to the comparison of the countries, and there is a big gap between the United States and other countries, but I think that the correlation that implies causation is kids in almost every country in the world go to school a lot more days than our kids go to school. You go to China, they don't stop for summer. They don't. They may have a month off. Nobody's got nearly 3 months off. You don't have all these holidays. And so if you want to do better in your education system, get the kids back in school more.
Chow, I want to, you've got your two girls. It's coming up fast. It'll be here before you know it.
I'm living the tween crisis right now.
Yeah.
Tween crisis.
But I mean, you know what? Okay, it's a simple question. What kind of school do you want for your girls?
I think about that. What keeps me up at night? What kind of, I have an incoming 7th grader and 6th grader, and she's already talking about, I've got to get my volunteer hours in, and I've got to do this, and I've got to start, prepping for high school, to get into high schools. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's the pressure that we're putting on young people. But at the same time, I want her to have fun and be a child and go to camp and do all those things. Look, academics is important. Obviously, it was education was a ticket to prosperity and upward mobility for our families. It's something that I value, and I think the kids value. They've gotten a good education in private school. That was a choice that we made. Because we live in the city, and HISD wasn't bucking up. I mean, during the pandemic, I can't tell you how many parents in my own little neighborhood in Garden Oaks pulled their kids from schools because the teachers, they didn't get the support they needed during COVID. And now all these kids are going to private schools, right?
By the
So
way,
HISD student population is down something like 12 to 15%.
And I will tell you, those parents who are moving in town, there are a lot of parents that are all looking for private schools. They're not looking at.
Let me put it. I have 3 children, and I get the makeup of the day, but I have 3 children. All went to HISD schools, all bright kids. But now they went to the best HISD schools out there. Because I wanted to go to the schools that my tax dollars had already paid for versus having to pay more. So there are good schools.
So did you move to go to a certain school?
No, you went to magnet school.
No.
You went to magnet school.
magnet
So you
school,
did exercise some school choice within the system.
Because the school in the neighborhood had been,
Was not a place where your kids could best prosper?
It had been neglected.
Marcus,
right?
what is that?
It had been
What was
robbed.
that Malcolm
when
X
you say
quote?
neglected, what do you mean?
Yeah, what is that Malcolm X quote you used earlier?
That applies differently because right now we're talking about institutions. We're talking about what a governing board, right? HISD versus independent, right? But what's the difference? Is the same difference between the schools that do well in HISD have a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff put into them. The schools that don't do well in HISD don't have a lot of stuff, right? And that stuff. Let's use Ryan Middle School as a perfect example, right? Ryan Middle School is a perfect example of what not to do. Ryan Middle School was a struggling middle school. I know because I made a commitment as an entrepreneur to work with the schools in my community. Blackshear Elementary, Ryan Middle School, Yates High School. When Ryan Middle School was struggling, they had principals come in that would try and change it. They would teachers that would come in, try and change it, and the resources weren't there to fix it or to attract the students to come to the school. HISD then said, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to just, scrap it. They took all the teachers out. They took all the administration out, brought in all new teachers, brought in all new administration, brought in all new money, brought in a whole new name, and then called it the Baylor campus at Ryan Middle School. Then what they did was told the students who live across the street, you can't come here. Yeah. You have to apply. And the feeder pattern population when they first started was 11%. 11%. They only let 11% of the students who would have gone there naturally. They only let 11% in. Now, had they allowed the school to stay the same without having the restrictions of it being magnet, then you would have saw an example of what happens when you infuse resources into a fledgling school and allow the kids who live in that low income area to benefit from it. That would have been a great example, but that's not what happened.
Look, I fully support your pursuit of the best possible education for your kids.
Yeah.
But I also see in the school that you decided not to attend the drain of your leadership and the talent that your kid brought, probably not only in intellect, but also leadership there. And so you have the magnet situation. We have this constant talent and brain drain and parental leadership drain going all over. You know, and so you have you have schools that are not only under, I guess, supported at the district level, they're supported by the neighborhood level because the best and the brightest are hauling ass. Is that unfair?
It may be fair, it may be accurate, it may be unfair and accurate, right? But let's use Yates as an example, right? Literally, walking distance from Yates is Energy High School. It's walking distance from Yates, right? Bill King is responsible for Energy High School. An example of let's throw a lot of resources. It is a great school with a great teachers, great administration, a lot of equipment, a lot of fun stuff for the kids to work with and to play with. It's a school full of resources. In walking distance, maybe not so much, right? And so where you allocate those resources, and those resources include advocacy, they include equipment, they include the talent of the teachers. And yes, when you have a school that has an amalgamation or a collection of a certain type of student, then yes, you're gonna have a certain type of parent, right? But that's just not gonna happen in a low income area where parents are working, 60 hours a week, if not more, and they're less trained to be in the engaged with the school the way people who have a little bit more influence, a little bit more time. It's just a different lifestyle. I know this from being a teacher, right? Yeah. My wife gets to go participate at the PTA. She gets to participate she volunteers for this, she volunteers for that. Why? Because we have the time. We have the resources. So she has it available to her. I can't say that for the kids that I taught, that their parents had that time or money available to them.
Hey, let me throw this out, and then something that Holly brought up. If we had demonstrable metrics that showed if we went to a year-round school with, say, a 3-week summer break, and yet it would cost all of us more in our local taxes, do you think there's the groundswell of support? We talk about wraparound services. Nothing like having 3 more months of people who care about you. Is there the impetus here? Is there the case to be made here, Bill?
No, actually, it's not popular at all. No, it doesn't make it. It's not the right thing to do. But when Greer was a superintendent, he wanted to extend for certain struggling schools. He wanted to start them early, about a month early, as I recall. And so the state law doesn't allow that, by the way. And so we were up lobbying to try to get the state law changed to add this month to these. And
why didn't they let them do that?
And who was against it?
Who?
Six Flags Over Texas, Southwest Airlines, the whole vacation industry.
Just follow the money, Marcus.
It makes sense.
Follow the money.
Because it was going to take the kids that worked at it. Six Flags Over Texas weren't going to be available to work that last month because they were back in school.
Right.
So you got these financial interests. But I'm telling you, I've read a lot about this. If you want to, have kids do better, they need to be in school longer.
Now, I can understand how the vacation industry and the employment industry was against it, but why didn't the legislation pass it anyway? That's the real thing.
Because they were
Those
up
were big
there
lobby.
handing
Don't
out
forget the
campaign
union.
contributions.
And
Hey, we've got a guy with a
So
PhD.
are we saying that?
Teachers union
Are we
posted
saying?
too, so
Well,
very
now I was about to say,
powerful.
but Greg, before we can have any conversation about extending school, which I'm not saying it's a bad idea, I'm not saying it's a good idea. I do agree that we lag in the world with regard to education, and it's in part because other countries are taking it a little bit more seriously than we are. We're too busy fighting about silly stuff, partisan
Well,
stuff.
it's a
But
cultural shift, though.
It is a
cultural
cultural
shift
shift.
that
But
goes
before
summer break.
before any
Push-ups,
conversation
athletics.
can begin, we've got to talk about compensation for teachers. And it's not we're going to pay you more so you can work longer. No, we've got to pay teachers more right now where they are before we can begin any conversation about extending school. And we've got to raise the pay grade to attract better talent, right? And so before we can get in that conversation, what I think is a necessary conversation, we got to talk about what some of the problems are that exist today that's causing us to fail in education as we are.
As the son and the nephew of lifelong educators, I agree with you completely. We do have someone with a PhD in education.
Yeah, and I just finished writing a
pile in here.
manuscript on urban education on the successes, challenges regarding that, and hopefully it gets published by the end of this year. But everything you said is correct. There are so many educational strands in terms of teacher pay, different programs, but the research has shown contrary to a lot of things. The book, I highly advise it, The Smartest Kids in the World. They're exceeding in the PISA study. This is the first world countries, second world countries. They do a study in math, science, and reading. That's it. And we're lacking like in the 30th percentile.
Yeah, like
and then they
35th,
contributed the factors, did a study of all these countries, and they realized not more hours, less hours actually, and less emphasis on extracurricular and sports was a common denominator as to why these countries were succeeding. Let me tell you why. For example, they were in poor countries, they would go to school like from 8 to 1, focus on algebra, math, science, reading, phonics, and that's it. Afternoons, they go and they do extracurricular and, at the park, community center, they learn sports, music, band, orchestra. They don't have these huge programs that they drain and siphon so much time and talent from these students. Let me give you an example. When I worked at Bel Air High School, I would get there at 6 o'clock in the morning and I see the kids practicing football at 6 o'clock in the morning, yet they're failing algebra, and yet after school they're practicing football. And then on Friday night they have games, and by Saturday morning they're so exhausted and being down they don't do the homework. And I said, if they just converted a few more of those hours into learning algebra, pathway to 20 more advanced math and science courses, they would be highly successful. But the emphasis on sports and extracurricular in secondary has really, really drained the educational attainment, which is the purpose of school, for minority students. And back to the issue of magnet schools, I agree. We shot ourselves in the foot. HISD did. My son and daughter both went to traditional schools, 3 generations of HISD students. My son and daughter went to Ivy League schools, New York, affirmative action, I'm not sure. But anyway, out of the traditional Chavez High School, because what I did was if I'm stepping back and getting away from the problem, I'm looking at hundreds of kids that I need to go in there and try to create solutions and systems, expand their AP program, hire effective teachers, build programs that are effective, because it's not only about my son and daughter getting the best education, it's about hundreds of kids in my neighborhood that should deserve a good education. So I'm the instrument of transformational leadership there, not on the outside. So as educators, we went there and we did a lot of things. I was sent to Harvard. We turned around the school before it even became popular. So these things, there are some effective practice. Magnet schools have, in a traditional school, before they even had turnaround programs, there were successful schools. HISD has exemplary schools, many exemplary schools, but they focus on the lower part of the unacceptable schools. But a traditional neighborhood school like Ryan or Tijerina, whatever, you get the cream of the crop, the brightest kids who have support systems, their parents that are really caring about them. The other ones are working, that they don't care, they're working. And they have academic proficiency. They went on to magnet schools, and now the other piece is going to charter schools. And what do you have left over? Low performing, low poverty kids. And then the folks come in with their F rating system and let's take over the whole system. And that is
Well, and
incorrect.
let's talk about the
situation.
size.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the size of HISD.
Oh, it's huge.
I mean, some would argue it's too big. And
I
I hope
agree.
in your research that you're looking at some of this trend of these micro schools where there are no extracurriculars built into the program. It's strictly academic. The families volunteer to, put their kids in this program, but it's, half a day, very academic, and then in the afternoon, the family, in a private sector chooses, okay, we're going to do baseball or football or
Kind
ballet.
of like homeschooling students. That's what they do.
Right, and
Yeah.
a lot of homeschool families, they take off a month in the summer, a month at Christmas, and a month in the spring, but it's almost a year-round school, but it's only half a day, and they're doing other things.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is a problem, and I see this in some of the Texas schools, and you compare it to some of the charter schools, these giant campuses. When we look at sociology and something called the Dunbar number about how many people you can in reality have a community with, it's not 3,500 students crammed onto a campus where they're walking down these super crowded hallways, and there's no sense of real community and adhesion there within that campus. I think that could be a bit of an issue too, and looking at kind of narrowing it down to a smaller
I agree.
set.
I think
we
Hold on for a
haven't
second.
talked about this is all money, right?
Yeah.
This is business. This is
It's vendors.
building stadiums and big schools. That's advocated for because it contractors
That's
Oh,
right.
look
benefit
at what these architecture
from it.
Hey,
right?
look,
firms and
Chow,
these,
unlike, we all have our personal contacts, but Chow will line up, 8 clients with all dealing with real life issues 5 days a week, and they come in. What are parents telling you, in terms of the stressors and in terms of,
COVID was hard. COVID was hard on kids of privilege. COVID was hard for vulnerable kids. That did not discriminate whatsoever. And the mental health conditions, the outcomes for these kids, not so good. Look, you call a counselor right now, they're all booked, right? There's not a lot of spots left. People are desperate. So when we talk about getting support for the kids, we have to talk about their emotional health too and well-being, that they need support in the schools. And these parents are coming to us saying, please help us. Our practice finally opened up to insurance panels because of this issue. Like, we can't afford $150 or $200 a session. Please, take our insurance. And it was a very thoughtful, meaningful process for us to decide, hey, we've got to be able to help more families.
I'm going to pivot real quick. Bill, is this placing chaplains in public schools as counselors going to pass legal muster?
Hopefully not.
I doubt it.
It's a simple question. I know. I cannot
has
even
a real
imagine what
response.
folks in your
Everybody has a very
profession think.
visceral response to that.
I would kind of tend to doubt it. It would make it. That would make it. Although, we have chaplains in the service and all sorts of other things as well. The problem when you've got such a multicultural system as we've got. I mean, I don't know how many different faiths are practiced in HISD, but it would be a bunch, That doesn't mean that you don't have, I've certainly seen examples of people that can have a very ecumenical, ministry before. I was involved with interfaith ministries for many years, as you know. I don't think it's a terrible idea, but I doubt that it meets legal muster. But I'm going to go back to the second this idea about the schools.
It's a terrible idea.
I had I was on the HSD Foundation board for, 25 years or something. And I used to go out and visit school campuses in that capacity quite frequently. And I remember I was out at an predominantly African-American high school out on the south side of town, and there was a young African-American man who was the principal there. I would say maybe 30, 35, something like that. And he and I were sitting chatting. And I asked him, I said, what's your biggest challenge? He said, my biggest challenge is that about 30% of my kids come to school every day either with a parent that's incarcerated or a parent that has a debilitating substance abuse problem. He said, so I've got a third of my school that is dealing with that kind of problem when they get to school every day. Now, the school I grew up in didn't have that kind of situation. I doubt that many of us grew up in schools that had that kind of situation. And, it is a very challenging, we're asking public schools to take on responsibilities that traditionally they never were supposed to be doing.
That's right.
And frankly, I think this gets back to the whole terrible policy mistake we made with the war on drugs. You know, the way that we go about dealing with addiction in this country is so terrible. All we want to do is punish the users and interdict the transmission of it. We never talk about how do we deal with the demand, how do we deal with the fundamental problems about why somebody wants to use these things in the first place. And the truth is, if you're rich, it's not really that much of a problem to be addicted to something, but if you're poor, it's a big damn problem.
Well, we're not addressing, you know, the root causes of addiction, and I would propose that it is trauma, right? We're not looking at people's traumas and addressing that, and I feel like this country is like big T, little T all over, right?
But I just want to
And
address
that trauma
that
can
issue.
occur in both low and high income.
I see it.
It's just that it's masked and handled differently with wealthy versus
Poor people are subjected to more trauma than wealthy people are.
Okay, let's not pretend that there haven't been periods in the past where we had trauma. We had, you know, the Spanish flu epidemic in World War I. We had World War II. We can go back through history and
Depression.
see
Polio.
all kinds of trauma situations. But the real, you know, the underlying thing, and people don't like to hear this, they want to hear that there's some sort of government policy solution. We do have this cultural issue where people, you know, see life as kind of meaningless, right? And, you know, I don't know that having a chaplain on a campus is going to pass muster legally. But, you know, there's something more than just a policy prescription, right? There's, you know, are we giving people an inwardly compelling reason to treat others well? Are we just saying be nice because if you're not nice you're going to get in trouble? Okay, that has some effect. But are we saying be kind because there's a compelling reason to believe in humanity and people?
I think that
people.
Look,
I mean, how do you fix that?
I've mentioned this before, and I'll continue to say it. When a school shooting happens, the first thing we do is send a bunch of counselors, right? Because of the trauma. Well, as you described, there are schools that have trauma on an ongoing basis, daily basis, which means there should be more counseling on an ongoing basis, on a daily basis. I am completely for more counseling on campus. And I'm not talking about counselors who set up schedules.
Right.
I'm talking about counselors who counsel, right?
Yeah.
And no, I am not for them pushing religion down anyone's throat or using it under the guise of religion. Let's just get to the basics of talking about humanity and not tainting
and there's a dearth of mental health counselors. I mean, that's the
Let me
reality
just
is you've
address
got
that issue. A couple of things. One, when I was on the board, I advocated for not more counselors. We have plenty of counselors. They're schedulers and event planners.
Right,
They're not
right.
counseling
Right.
at high school.
Yeah.
What we need more is psychologists and social workers, one in every high school. If we can have a nurse in every high school to address the physical needs, why can't we have a psychologist to fill the physical need? And I got a lot of pushback by it.
But
No,
that
should be a mandate.
I think the result of that would be a better educated student,
the
right?
schools that have psychologists, social
I think
workers,
if
they
there are
address it.
professional psychologists on campuses working with teachers, right? I believe the product is going to be far greater.
No. The
than,
results
you
are
know,
staggering.
I feel so
take-
validated.
Yeah.
Well, it'll take a generation, though, Chow. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
there's not enough of you go around.
Yeah.
Well,
There
and, you know,
just
this,
isn't.
This is a second career, and
Yeah, I
I
know.
just see the need. And I see, listen, the stats prove it. You have mental health access. You get somebody to you get kids into counseling, adults into counseling. They do get better.
Yes,
Well,
but
let's dig down into the details.
let's
then.
dig-
And case management,
What are
access to
This is
resources.
a high school or university. What was it designed for? What was the purpose? Academics, right? That was it was designed for. You know, form, create its function. Now, what happened, and according to this book, also the smartest kids in the world, we ranked down here so low in math, science, and reading. This institution was created to develop these skills, academic skills, outcomes, budgets. Everything is based on improving academic outcomes. But what we've done in America is that we have a buffet of services. We have extracurricular, we have sports, now we want to do counseling and solve all the social ills from the outside, where it was designed for academics. And if we have a buffet of services that siphon energy and time from the core purpose of it, of course our results are down here and not up here in comparison to.
I don't know if I could compare counseling to athletics.
No, no. It's providing more services. In other words, the school was not designed to solve the social ills from the outside. That's where I'm getting at, because we have gang activity, we have drug activity, we have depression, anxiety.
I don't think I agree
with
with either.
social media is causing the anxiety and depression to skyrocket. Not so much.
I agree with that.
Yeah, okay.
But when you talk about what the school was created for,
Right.
it was created for social impact, right?
Mass education.
But for
Mass
for,
public education
For the
to
social
develop a
for
workforce.
the social good, right?
To develop a
It's all
educated
interdependent.
workforce.
Hold on, Bill. You say something, and then I'm going to switch this real quick. I'm going to reassert my role as moderator. Okay, Bill, go
Stirring
ahead.
the pot.
Look, I think we're, for some reason in this generation, we're uncomfortable talking about it. There is a spiritual component to a human
Absolutely.
being.
Yes.
You know, and actually most of the schools that were started all over the world, including this country, you know, were started by religious institutions. Now, the problem
so was
is,
slavery.
the problem that we've got. No, I don't agree with that. That's not-
You might not agree with it, but it's a reality.
No, it was the Methodists and the Quakers that got rid of slavery.
Got it.
Yeah.
But it was also the other Christians that were participants and advocates
They
for
used it as an excuse, but there's nothing scriptural or there's no religion that condones slavery.
The Bible was used throughout slavery as a
most
tool.
certainly does not. It most
Oh
certainly
man!
we're
It was-
digressing.
But
Huh?
anyway, but
it
anyway.
most certainly was. It most certainly did.
Slavery exists, replete with references to slaves in the Bible, but
The Old Testament with the Hebrews.
But the New Testament
But
doesn't
slavery
talk.
pre-existed the
Right.
Judeo-Christian
Anyway,
writings.
But
so,
anyway.
I mean,
For
Oh,
another
no,
time.
I was simply talking about
Go ahead, Bill.
transatlantic
but
slave
I
trade.
want to hear the rest of what Bill has to say.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we're missing something because we're uncomfortable talking about it, and we're uncomfortable talking about it because we don't want to impose our views on other people, and that's absolutely legit, and it's part of our constitutional structure that you shouldn't do that. But
I don't disagree with you, Bill. I think acknowledging that there's a spiritual component, that we are spiritual beings having a human existence is a real thing. That's not religion, though. That's completely different. When we get to talking about putting chaplains in school, we get to talking about indoctrinating people. We get to talking about imposing
the way it
a
works
particular.
in the military, where you have a
depends.
chaplain, it's voluntary for the service members to seek out the chaplain, to seek those services. My own pastor is a Navy Reserve chaplain.
And how many cases programs have we had where the shall we say, the justification is, if we can save or help 15 people, it'll be worth it. And so if we have these 1,000 chaplains out there and they actually help several hundred or 1,000 kids, has it been a net good thing?
I think
you
you
know,
would
I don't
Why
know.
not put 1,000 counselors?
Well, yeah,
I agree. I'm
think
not
you
going to
would have
disagree with
No,
that.
here's the thing. I think you
Psychiatrists.
have to define what
Psychologists.
chaplains,
More
Right.
where
effective.
they come from, what kind of training they receive, right?
Yeah.
And is
Same
it-
with the counselors
look,
Right.
and
Or
the
interfaith,
psychologists,
yeah.
because there's, we make this mistake a lot where we assume all people in this profession are good or all people in this profession are
Well, there's
bad.
gonna be
They're
bad
just
apples.
humans,
Yeah,
right?
we're
And so
humans.
we need to have
And I think we're also
standards.
ignoring the fact that, the vast majority of human beings in this world, and I'm talking about 95, 98%, express their spirituality through some kind of religious beliefs. I mean, that's just the reality of who we are as human beings. And I think to ignore that and say we can just not pay any attention to it whatsoever is well, you tell me.
95%?
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Through
say
some-
that.
I'd say
90.
Speaking of
20
which,
Is this a segue?
the one,
I think
a
it's
segue
20%.
here. I have a
95%.
segue.
Yes,
Hold on, hold on.
Come on, honey.
Hold on.
Do you know?
Now,
of
I got to go to
all
your
the
causation
religious?
correlation thing.
Hold on.
That
No, I don't think that.
We're
that
practicing
may,
affirmative
if that's
action.
true, it's
You're
only
next.
because that's
How they were raised.
that's how they were
That's
raised.
right.
Whoa,
That's the
whoa,
only
whoa.
way.
We're all talking
that's the
at
only
once.
way
We're all
of-
talking at
of
once.
expressing that.
Religion. That's
We're all
the part.
talking at once.
There
On
was
poly-
a
Speaking
Supreme
of
Court
spirituality,
decision.
yeah.
I've got to go to
Supreme-
church here in a little bit.
Me too.
so-
Okay. There was a Supreme Court
Holly has the
decision
floor.
that hasn't made the big news. It was unanimous this past cycle, And it was a freedom of religious expression decision, unanimous decision that this USPS worker could, on religious grounds, be off on Sundays.
Yeah.
And it was supporting the religious beliefs. And again, this is we talk about the divisive decisions.
And you know what? To your
Unanimous
point, Holly, Bill and I were talking. We had some locker room talk. We were talking about this early. That this argument by the left that the court has been all right is just not true. Those two major cases, you could make that up. But if you look at the other cases that have been decided, the one about voting, it clearly shows that that's not true. Doesn't mean that they hadn't just been waiting to tackle their big their big points. But I can't go with this thing of everything has been.
Before we lose Bill
and Marcus.
The Texas Tribune ran an article this week talking about how there was a study that said there were 10,000 additional births in Texas since the ban went into effect. There was pretty loose. There was a suggestion, not a correlation. Bill got his Irish up a little bit about it. You want to tell us why?
It's complete nonsense. I hate these kind of. And as you know, statistics is one of the things I've got a big interest in. And the classic mistake that's made over and over and over is confusing correlation with causation. We have two things that happen here at the same time, therefore one must have caused the other. And you're looking at a very small data set, and all sorts of other things were going on besides the abortion law being passed. And frankly, we can go look at the number of abortions that were performed in Texas, and it's surprisingly not that much different than it was before. And I mean, this is a great example. And look, the Tribune, I think, does a great job of covering the legislature. I read them on a regular basis. But this is an example of where somebody in the news media abused their privilege of being a reporter to take a statistical study and use it to support their political view. And it's awful.
Well, probably some sort of implicit bias there.
And the question is, what I found is whenever there's a study, you can find out who backed the study, right? And if you find out who did the study and who backed the study, man, you'll find some.
I think Chow said something earlier. Follow the money.
Follow the money.
All right, with that, we're going to let everybody off 3 minutes earlier so they can pursue a very good Methodist sermon, I guess, today.
All right.
And then I'll say "C'est la vie."
Okay. Hey.
Off to France.
Really enjoyed being with you guys. I get paid for this. It's great. Hopefully it'll continue. Hey, I'm asking you guys, follow me on social media, follow the station on social media. We are becoming an entity that's less dependent upon this broadcast and more dependent on the Over the Waves broadcast and more on stuff like this right here. So. Do me a favor, do me righteous.
If you like
stroke.
it, if you love it,
share.
All right. Like it.
As my 12-year-old says, Mom, you're on TV, but you're not on YouTube.
All right.
Or TikTok.
Goodbye, everybody. Have a great week.
You're not one of the cool kids.
Isn't that the
TikTok
She
is
said
rocking
she
it.
said,
That was a good
Mom,
show.
you're on
Yeah,
TV.
stirred the pot a little bit.
Like they don't watch TV. They watch digital.
I don't watch TV.
I don't watch
have
TV.
TV services.
Oh, I have direct TV, but it's streaming. Direct TV now is streaming.
Yeah.
I do watch the news. But that's what she said, and that's how young people, they don't watch that.
Oh, no.
Absolute strike.
Icon.
Header, go!
A World Cup three-peat in her sights. What's it gonna take to stop her?
Starting July on Fox 26.
Embattled and defiant, suspended Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton announces he won't be telling his side of the story in the upcoming impeachment trial before the state Senate. Here at home, a pair of pushback court challenges aimed at new state laws, clearly set on missile lock for the progressive policies of Houston and Harris County. And with the nation's highest court nixing affirmative action on America's college campuses, will equal opportunity suffer or survive in the land of the free? I'm Greg Grugan, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, Dr. Sergio Lira, president of LULAC Houston. Next up, Holly Hansen, political reporter for The Texan. In the three spot, well-known businessman and columnist for Real Clear Politics, Bill King. Batting cleanup, longtime Houston journalist and social worker, Chow Win. And closing us out, Marcus Davis, highly regarded restaurateur and host of Fish, Grits, and Politics. Let's begin.
Many people wrongly believe that affirmative action allows unqualified students to be admitted ahead of qualified students. This is not how college admissions work.
To cut that off as if we have reached utopia in this country is simply naive and ignores the realities that exist.
10 days have passed since the nation's highest court struck down the use of affirmative action admission policies at America's institutions of higher learning. And I think it's fair to say both fury and gratitude linger.
Today's decision has started a new chapter in the saga of the history of Asian Americans in this country.
And while many Asian Americans celebrated this landmark ruling, Ellie Mistel, legal columnist for The Nation and a Harvard Law graduate who happens to be black, called the decision a redeployment of the 14th Amendment to justify a white version of colorblindness. Panel, folks didn't tune in to hear what I make of this ruling, but rather to hear what you have to say. And Marcus Davis, you've been first in line on this one.
Listen, I am not in denial of the inequities in this nation. I am not in denial of the need to correct those inequities in this nation. But I got to say this, dear black people, affirm your own action. HBCUs, black businesses, black institutions, fill them up. Stop knocking at the door of other people, begging them to let you in. We have within our own capacity to do for our community what we can and what we will. In the words of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, up ye might erase, accomplish what you will. Your mama taught you a good lesson years ago, probably your grandma too. Baby, if they don't want to play with you, go find somebody else to play with.
All right, Chalwin, I know you're torn on this particular topic.
Yeah, very mixed feelings. I mean, as an Asian American, and Asian Americans, as we all know, value the importance of education, and we're seeing this. And I don't deny that Asian American students feel discriminated, but Harvard Law School sent 100,000 pages of documents and did not find one case of Asian American discrimination in these cases. Look, when we look at affirmative action, what we're looking at, Asians pitting against black and brown people and students, this sets a very dangerous precedent in the future. And all you have to do is look at the UCLA system, the UC system that did away with affirmative action in the late 90s. And it took decades to rewrite that ship, right? To correct the ship that we would have more equality and fairness when it comes to race in the schools. It took decades, and $500 million is what's reported. It's going to have to rewrite again, and institutions now, I think, are scrambling to figure out what that's going to look like.
All right. Sergio Lira, LULAC has taken a very strong position on this.
Absolutely. National LULAC and Greater Houston LULAC strongly oppose this decision by the Supreme Court because, to start off with, you don't have very many African Americans or Latinos at Harvard or North Carolina Ivy League schools. So in order to get rid of this law, what you're doing is closing the very few opportunities that are there. And you're right, Mr. Marcus Davis, you may go to HBCU universities. Latinos do not have HBCU universities in America, so therefore they're out there trying to seek opportunities and given that opportunity. And we can all agree that there is racial inequalities in education and although a lot of institutions in America, but education is different. It's not the private sector. Education was intended for everyone, not just the few, the privileged, and the wealthy.
All right, Bill King, you're the only person I think with a law degree here, and you read and think about this stuff a lot. What's your take on the ruling?
I find myself very conflicted over this as well. You know, in this country, we've set an ideal of people being judged on their character, on their abilities, and to be, you know, colorblind. That is the ideal that we would like to have in this country. Now, we've fallen way short of that throughout our history. And so affirmative action said, we're going to kind of wink at the ideal and kind of ignore that for right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to give people a special advantage. It is absolutely contrary to the ideal that we have, but it was a means to get us to that end. I think the question I keep struggling with, when do you end that? Because when affirmative action was adopted, it said we need this for maybe 40 or 50 years. We're well past that now. I think we're close to 70 years. And there's a lot of people in the Asian community, the white community, that feel resentment about it. And to some degree, it's actually stirring up more racial animus. And so it needs to end at some point in time. When you end it, you know, is the very difficult question. I don't have a great answer for that.
All right, Holly, I know you have some strong feelings here and some thoughts about it. Go ahead.
Well, to Bill's point, there was this idea that it would come to an end at some point. As recently as 2007, Barack Obama talked about, you know, at some point we're going to not need these programs to be in place. So the question is, if it's been in place for all these decades, has it been efficacious? Has it solved this problem that we see? Or is there another cause that needs a different solution? The problem for some of these students who are admitted to universities like Harvard or Stanford with test scores that are below the top 1%, when they get in those environments, they don't perform well. Statistics show that there's a high dropout rate amongst those students. Wouldn't it be better for them to go to a university that's better suited to their preparation level? And if they're not prepared, what we really need to be doing, and I know we're going to talk about this later in the show, we need to look at the earlier parts of a student's education, Houston ISD, for example, where we have students in some of the minority majority schools who maybe less than 30% are reading on grade level. That's where the focus needs to be if we want to have better outcomes.
All right, hold that thought. Still to come. Our state's impeached attorney general says he won't be testifying in his own defense. And in our Sunday survey, we're asking viewers if Ken Paxton's decision to avoid the witness stand in his trial before the Senate indicates guilt, innocence, or neither. Tell us what you think. Vote on our webpage, fox26houston.com. Just click on the poll at the top of the page, or tell 26 using our news app. But up next, we continue our discussion of the Supreme Court decision banning college affirmative action. Will American universities find new ways to promote diversity and opportunity? fun, Juan.
It's good because everyone is seen as equal and everyone has like an equal slate. However, it's bad because for the people who aren't able to get as many connections as like white people or as people who already live in the States, you know, it doesn't help anyone out.
More